everyone, and welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast. My name's James Dixon. I'm wishing you a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you are joining today's podcast from. The podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Engage, powered by D2I Systems, winner of Best Event Management Platform at the 2017 Event Technology Awards. To learn how Engage can make your business more profitable, visit d2isystems.com/engage. So hello to everybody. Welcome to today's podcast, and welcome to our guest on today's podcast, who I'm delighted to say joins us from the beautiful New York City. So across the other side of the Atlantic, we welcome Val Sarnev. Val, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thank you, James. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Not a problem at all. Great that you could join us. And Val is the CEO and founder of Conference Pulse. We're going to find out more about them as we progress through today's episode of the podcast. But Conference Pulse, if you go to their website, conferencepulse.com, the first thing you see is that it says that they help event sales and marketing professionals to find and secure relevant sponsors, exhibitors, speakers, and venues. So, Val, we've welcomed you to the podcast, but first of all, I suppose, give us a bit of history about Conference Pulse, how and why it was started.
Of course. So my background, James, is actually on Wall Street. I'm originally from Bulgaria. I came here in New York City many years ago, and I went and worked for Credit Suisse, the investment bank, for many years, for 10 years, where I did investment banking, strategy, and consulting for the senior management. And as part of my strategy role, actually, at one point, I also had to help manage the events portfolio of Credit Suisse. And at one point, I was tasked with a very simple project, I thought, which was to go and find out what sponsors made sense for the events that Credit Suisse organizes.
Sure.
And also to find out what our competitors are doing in the space, mainly UBS. So I thought it's going to be a simple task. I went out there in the public domain, James, and it was a black box. I couldn't get any information on what I was looking for. And the question was pretty simple. So I thought I'm going to Google a few things and I'm going to put it together. And yet it took me a month to put together a simple spreadsheet. So this is when I realized that there is a huge white space when it comes to the data for events and the events industry itself. It's extremely decentralized in the public domain. And yet about $512 billion are spent per year for the entire events marketing sector. And yet there is not enough data transparency out there, which is why I decided that it makes sense to launch Conference Pulse with the idea to centralize, standardize, and aggregate that information that will provide insightful data and predictive analytics for event professionals to be able, as you said, and as we mentioned on our website, find and secure relevant sponsors, exhibitors, speakers, and venues.
Now, of course, we're going to find out how this works and what benefits it has to conference organizers and event organizers. But I suppose I'm going to ask a question that may or should have come later in the conversation, but I'm going to throw it in there straight away. And that is that this might not be just for conference and event organizers. Could this have just as much relevance to companies themselves who are looking to find the right events to sponsor? So when they have their sponsorship budgets allocated every year, there are so many events out there that they also need to find the right ones that are suitable for their sponsorship.
That's exactly right, James. And actually, before we launched the company, I did customer discovery with many professionals, including, to your point, sponsors, exhibitors, speakers, venue holders, and also organizers. So you're absolutely correct. The platform itself is multifaceted. It does address the needs on all the different constituents depending on who you are as part of the events industry. So we have actually a few clients who are sponsors and who are exhibitors and are looking, once they log in, they look on our database. We have more than 20,000 conference and trade shows already aggregated. They can filter based on attendees, number of attendees, based on location, based on for example, social media activity, etc. And this way they find out which conferences might potentially make sense for them. But beyond that, actually, James, what is also very interesting that we have many other clients who also use the platform as a competitive intelligence tool, especially on the sponsor side. Again, for example, let's say, and I'm not saying that's a client of ours, but let's say Microsoft is looking at the platform, so they can see what Oracle is doing from a conference standpoint, which events they're sponsoring, which events they're organizing, and this way they can compare and see how they stack up against their competitors, so to speak.
Sure.
The same with any other company in the technology sector, which is the one we're focused on right now. For example, Google versus Apple, or you can pick any company you want to. But this is how this platform is also used, and we also actually have speakers who are our clients. So they're looking for organizers to potentially book them as keynote speakers.
Sure. So when it comes to, if I'm an event organizer and I think, right, okay, I need sponsors for my event, I could go onto your platform and I could input all of the various different variables that are relevant to my event. So how many people are attending, what type of sector it's servicing, how many speakers there are going to be, how many exhibitors there are going to be, lots of different scenarios or variables. And then it would potentially show me the sponsors who've sponsored events that meet the similar criteria?
That's exactly right. This is exactly how the interface plays out and the UX and UI of the platform. It's very simple, very intuitive. There is no need for any training. You just log in, you click on one button, which is the filter button, and then everything is self-explanatory, obviously. So you can also filter by average number of attendees for each conference, so you can see who's sponsoring what. And then once you click on a specific sponsor and you get access their profile, you can see all the conferences they have sponsors that we have aggregated. You can see something which is very important, actually, James. You can see the key contact details of the key decision makers of that sponsor, right? So there is a big lead gen component to our platform, in addition to the intelligence aspect of it. Yeah. And you can also see who are the actual social media, what are the social media accounts, which venues they have hosted events at, which venues they have sponsored events at, what kind of speakers they have engaged in the past, the sponsors themselves through their speaking engagements. You can see how many attendees they have reached through their sponsorship engagement. So it's a very extensive, very informative kind of platform, and you get that data instantly, real time, which the big value add for many conference organizers out there that are already our clients, including, for example, O'Reilly Media, is the fact that it takes, as you can imagine, a ton of resources and time to collect this data. And that's the immediate value add that we have for organizers. We save them a ton of money and time, which are obviously correlated, the two, and aggregate that information, have it in front of them real time, instantly.
From a development point of view, when you were building the platform, how have you been able to source this info, and how difficult is it to actually maintain up-to-date records of this? Is it a very time-consuming process for you as a company to actually collate and find out all of this data?
Yes, and that's an excellent question, actually. So I think that's one of the biggest value adds we have as a company, James. As I mentioned previously, the time we save people to collect this information is immense, is truly transformative. So for us, the way we aggregate the data, to answer your question, we use more than 120 different sources in the public domain to aggregate the data via technology and algorithms. We use machine learning to standardize the data and centralize it onto the platform. And we also get it directly from people themselves. And we have a team of 20 data entry experts who also actually look at the data and make sure the quality and quantity is maintained.
So there will be almost like a verification process where they'll find who the latest sponsors were for a particular event in 2017, and
exactly.
they will actually do some manual research to check that that's accurate, that was correct.
That's correct.
And it could be as simple as going to that event's website and seeing the logos of those sponsors on there to confirm that data is correct.
Exactly. That's exactly the process, yes.
And so prior to actually launching, when you had the idea to do this, you mentioned yourself that going back to when you're working for Credit Suisse and working on their events and trying to source this information yourself, when you then had the idea to create a platform that could do this for other event organizers, how long was the process of creating the platform itself and building the software? And was that something that you had to outsource? Did you have the capability and the skills yourself to actually program the software, or did you have to find people who had those skills to marry up with your own skill set?
So actually, I have a co-founder. He's the CTO. And I'm the CEO of the company, as you mentioned during the introduction. My co-founder is actually, this is our second startup together. We've been working together for 5 years now, James. So we know each other very well. He's a genius developer. He programs in about 9 different programming languages. So he's really good. And I also actually have a background. I graduated from St. John's University here in New York City, undergraduate degree in computer science.
Right.
And then I have an MBA degree from Cornell University. So I have that mix of business and computer science technical background.
Yeah.
But he's the one basically developing everything and programming and coding it. So that's how we built it up. It took us about, for the MVP, the first version, about 3 months. We got our first client about 7 months into it, and we're only about 12 months since the inception of the company.
Really? So you're a year old, and how much
Yes.
how much change and adaptation of the platform has there been in that first year?
Yeah, so at first, as you can imagine, with any startup, it's tough, right? It takes a while for people to understand, to trust you. But we managed to get quite a few pretty big names, which some of them are mentioned on our website, on our homepage.
Mm-hmm.
And we managed also to get people and event professionals from all different spectrums, as we discussed before, James. For example, we got organizers, we got sponsors, we got a speaker to be a client of ours. So we saw that, and most importantly, our potential early adopters saw the value of our platform very early on. So they didn't need that much of the trust aspect of it, which obviously inherently you don't have as a startup because nobody has heard of you, right?
Sure.
But just the platform itself and the product itself sold itself, which was the important part, right? We wanted to make sure that people see the value, and that value is 10 times in what the perceived kind of cost is to them.
Sure.
So that's kind of what we always wanted to build. And for us here, James, we're in the long term. This is a big play for us. We want to ultimately create a huge market network where all event professionals can access our platform, interact, connect at a much more efficient way, underlined by the data sets that we have already centralized. Sure. And we're going to keep on improving that because you understand it's a constant, ongoing process.
Well, indeed, the sponsors will change every year. You know, there will be some sponsors that are very loyal to certain types of events, but similarly, there will be sponsors and companies that move their sponsorship. There will be new events that are created. There will be old events that cease to exist. And so things are constantly fluctuating. And one thing that I wanted to ask you is you're talking to us today from New York, and I'm sure a lot of your clients will be North America based. Is all the data that you've collated so far relevant to sponsors and relevant to the marketplace just for North America, or is this expanding globally now?
So we're the majority of the data sets and the data and the information we have is America's focused, US focused. I wouldn't say North, but US focused. But we do have some information outside the US. But as a startup, we need to focus on what is important right now and be pretty narrow. And you probably know, James, about 40% of the entire conference in the world take place in the US. So once we take care of the US, by definition, we're taking care of half of the world's kind of conference. But eventually, most definitely want to focus on the UK, of course, another huge market, potential market for us, and obviously Asia Pacific as well. Sure. So we do have global ambitions, but it's still early to focus on that. Now we want to focus on the US.
Yeah, and people that are using it, this may seem like a very, very simple question and an obvious question, and people may kick me for it when they listen to it. But this has obviously been developed as a software platform. When you created it, did you need to create mobile versions of it? You know, I can imagine that most of the time the people using this will be office based. There will be people who are sat at a computer looking to find sponsors for their events. But did you need to create mobile versions of this as well for people to be able to use when they're outside of their offices, or is it just computer-based, PC-based at the moment?
Yeah, at the moment is PC-based, computer-based. To your point, James, it's mainly used by enterprises, by professionals, by sales professionals or business development professionals within an organization. So almost by definition, they're usually in their office and they're working on it on their actual PCs. However, eventually we might build some mobile version, but currently we're PC based.
Sure. Sure. And one thing I noticed that when you go on the website is on the homepage, if people go to the website and scroll down, you'll see some headline figures of some of the stuff that Conference Pulse can offer. And there's 20,000 plus conferences and trade shows listed on. There's 60,000 speakers.
Yes.
And I suppose speakers in the events industry are always looking for somewhere new to go to, aren't they? They're always looking to take their particular talk or their topic to new events and to new conferences and to new business events. Have you had experience so far of speakers and people coming to you and saying, can I be listed on your database? Or is it very much a case that you've sourced all the information yourself?
No, actually, we have both. We have sourced a ton of the information. Obviously, not all the 60,000 speakers have opted in a way that they have come to us, in other words. We have obviously aggregated that information. But we also have many speakers that actually came to us and said, this is a brilliant idea. We're very interested in it. We want to get our name out there, to your point, James. But also, many of them are actual professionals. They work in different companies. We have some really high-profile people on that list of 60,000 plus speakers. We have CEOs of Fortune 500 companies there. We have also CFOs, founders, all kinds of different professionals who work for different companies. And then this way you can go and again, you can filter by title, by company, by location, and then you can get a sense of who are the right speakers for your event potentially, and you can contact them through our platform. Now with the speakers, since many of them, as I mentioned, are high profile CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, what we do is the double opt-in. So you sent an email, we asked that specific person whether she or he wants to connect with you, and if they express interest, then we do the connection. Otherwise, obviously, the connection doesn't happen.
Sure.
Because one thing, you want to make sure nobody gets spammed, right, James, as you can imagine.
Well, that's the thing, data collection and data management is such a big issue now.
Of course, exactly. With GDPR and everything else, we have to be very careful and make sure that we're compliant, yes.
Indeed, and I know that was and we discussed it at length on the podcast in previous months and in the run up to it becoming going live, if you can call it that it wasn't just going to affect European data; it was going to affect global companies because of how many people move in and out of the international events industry. It was going to be a big issue for it. When you developed this scenario, as going back to what I mentioned about sponsors and people changing and constantly fluctuating, how much of your time is spent collecting new data and how much of your time is spent refining the existing data, if you can call it that? Because there must be quite a lot of time that has to be allocated to making sure that contacts are constantly kept up to date and that the right people are allocated to the right companies.
That's correct. So actually, I would say, I've never thought of this. It's an excellent question. I think I would say maybe 40-60 actually. I think 40% is spent on making sure that the past data already aggregated is actually up to date. And it's and the quality of the data is pretty high. And also, I would say about 60% collecting all the other new data and aggregating that, standardizing it, and centralizing it into the platform.
Sure. With the ability to input certain criteria in the way that an event organizer could input the figures and the information related to their event to find a sponsor, is it also applicable for people who visit events and who visit trade shows? So the attendees, the actual audiences, is it theoretically possible for them to use Conference Pulse to actually say, right, we want to find out more about this particular market. Where are the good conferences? Where are the good shows? Where are the good events that we can go and go to as attendees?
So currently our focus is on actual professionals, less on the attendees themselves. So that's why we want to position this as the platform for the events professionals to use to connect better and to get enough information and intelligence to make more informed decisions and thus save time and money, right? So it's less the focus on attendees, but hypothetically, absolutely anybody can join in and look at the 20,000 plus conferences you saw and you mentioned on our homepage and decide which ones make sense for them to attend. Sure. But beyond that, obviously, the applicability is limited. Or maybe they want to see, for example, a specific speaker where has that speaker spoken at, and or where they're going to speak in the future.
Yeah.
And maybe if I'm interested as an attendee to listen to the speaker, I would like to go to that event. So to your point, James, there is a lot of applicability there for attendees, but that's not who we're focused on as a client. We're focused to address the needs of the event professionals themselves.
That's interesting you say that, because there are a lot of examples and scenarios where, especially in the software industry and especially in the events industry, where theoretically a platform or a system could be expanded to do different things, and it could do this and it could do that and it could do this as well. And do you think it's important for software suppliers and for technology suppliers to actually do something really well, focus on one particular aspect and do it really, really well, even if they could be adapted to do other things?
Yes, and not only I think it's important, I actually think it's critical. I do think that and that's the reason why many startups, not only in the events industry and software vendors and providers, have actually gone out of business, is because they try to do too many things too quickly, right? So I think in order for us to scale and to keep on adding value to the industry, as my job is as CEO is to make sure that we do the right things in the right order. And the right order is critical, because you can do the right things in the wrong order and you're going to fail. If you do the right things in the right order, it's the only way you can succeed. And as they say, only the paranoid survive, right? So we need to make sure that we execute according to our product roadmap, to our plan, and make sure that we add value in the industry at stages.
Yeah.
And that's why, exactly the way you said, James, we're focused now on specifically on organizers as clients, and specifically actually on sponsors and exhibitors. That's the data sets that we're very focused on. Then we're going to, and across different industries, starting with information technology, because it's also that element to it, right? You cannot only focus on a product development standpoint, but you also need to focus on an industry standpoint. You cannot go after all the industries at the same time, right? So we're focused on information technology and pharma and medicine right now. And then we're going to open up to business services, and we're going to open up to all the other industries that are covered.
So the other sectors that...
Exactly.
Sure. And again, that's a very important point, because, you know, when we talk about the events industry, and let's talk about conferences and trade shows, you know, there is a conference and there is a trade show for every type of business and every type of industry in the world, whether that's agriculture, pharmaceuticals, footwear, fashion, clothing, sports, machinery, engineering. Every industry and every sector that has a place, it has a conference and somewhere where people go to meet up. And as you said, you know, it's important to just maybe focus, as you've done, on doing certain ones of those really, really well and strongly before moving on to the next one.
Yeah, exactly, James. And to that point, as you mentioned before, we have about 20,000 plus conferences already and trade shows, that includes both, already onto our platform. There are about 250,000 that take place per year in the US, and about 11,000 trade shows. So as you can see, because of that structured approach, we're already about 15 to 20% penetration into the entire market set. And we've been only around for a few months, right? For essentially 12 months. So imagine where we're going to be a year or 2 years from now. I think it's very realistic to capture. We'll never get 100%. That's obviously impossible. But I do think it's very possible to get 80+% of the entire data sets out there when it comes to the 250,000 conferences in about 11,000 trade shows. Sure. And those are the ones that matter, right? I'm not talking about meetups and small groups, small meetings. Those obviously are not on our platform. With 10 people getting together, they're not going to be on conference calls.
Yeah. But as far as people go, when they wanted to source sponsors or information relating to the large events, that's where they go. And this is all about saving people's time, isn't it?
Right, exactly. Time, and in a way also save them money, because for both sides, if you think about how much organizers need to allocate for their sales teams to go out there and collect this information and put it together, and then actually go and find the right people to contact within the different sponsors, that's a big task, which takes a lot of time, and time equals money. So I would say we do both, right? By saving a ton of time, save a ton of money for organizers.
Yeah, and it's an obvious thing to say, but You could phone up at your company, or you can email a company. You could get the opportunity to go in and speak to them, and you go through all the process and the time that's spent to set up that meeting, to find out that actually when you go to that meeting, they turn around and they say to you, oh, this is actually not the right type of event for us. We tend to sponsor other to be able to actually input different demographics relating to the type and the size and the industry and the amount of attendees, et cetera, and have all of those variables lined up in order to identify sponsors that have done similar things. Straight away that you're going to be talking to people who actually are relevant to the type of event that you're operating.
That's exactly right. And also, I think even before you get to the meeting, the time you save by deciding which meeting to go to, and also the other value add I would argue is that organizers can put together a much better marketing campaign to get to a meeting, if you know what I mean. If you have all the intelligence, you can email the right people and send them a very personalized email versus just generic sales emails, where based on the data you have gotten from Conference Pulse, you can personalize the email and then obviously increase your likelihood of getting a response drastically. Sure. Right? Because it's going to be very personalized. You can say, I know for a fact that you have sponsored about 40 events. Your average number of attendees is about 1,500 people. My event matches that very closely. That's why I think there is potential fit here. And you can speak very specifically about specific speakers that those sponsors have sponsored, the events that they have spoken at. And this way, by me, if I'm the potential sponsor and I get a very personalized email like that, the likelihood of me responding is much higher than getting the generic emails that everybody else sends me, right?
Of course.
So that's a differentiator as well for you as an organizer.
Of course. And this is a classic thing about digital data now, isn't it? People are bombarded with so much information that in order to actually cut through all that information, you have to be so specific, don't you? You have to be able to say something to somebody that captures their attention within 10 or 15 seconds, maybe
that's
even
right.
less.
That's it. Yes.
You have to be relevant. You have to be specific. You have to be accurate with whatever message you're sending out to somebody.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's about exactly the time I think people spend between 5 to 10 seconds to decide whether they keep on reading. So if you can get them that very specific information that they're like, wow, this person did their homework, that's what matters, right? Because then people almost feel an obligation to respond because they know you spend the time to do your homework.
Absolutely.
And you care enough to do the homework, right?
Yeah. I hope that in 5 to 10 seconds we've captured people's attention today, and that they've listened all the way to the end of today's podcast by being captured within the first 5 to 10 seconds of what we're talking about. And on that note, we have been talking to Val Sarnev. Val is the CEO and co-founder of Conference Pulse. Conferencepulse.com is the website to head over and find out a bit more about them. As Val has said during today's podcast, they're based, he's in New York City at the moment, and very much based in the USA at the moment, but no doubt as good software like this and as good services that are offering a real benefit to the industry become bigger and grow, this will expand. And I know that we've got conference organizers and we've got listeners to the podcast who tune in from all over the world. Even though we're based in the UK, I know that there'll be people listening to this and watching this that are tuning in from the USA as well. So if anybody out there wants to get in touch with Val, conferencepulse.com is the place to go, and I'm sure you can find out a bit more about them. Val, thanks very much for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you, James. It was a pleasure. And I only want to add also that we offer a free trial, so people can come and try us out when they go to conferencepulse.com.
Absolutely, and I saw that myself when I was looking on the website this morning, and there's all sorts of great information and statistics on there, and you can find out more about what those guys are up to. If you want to find out a bit more about what we're up to at Event Industry News, go to eventindustrynews.com, and you can go to the relevant sections of the website that are best suited for the work that you do in the event industry. Our own podcast is brought to you by our sponsor Engage, powered by D2I Systems, winner of Best Event Management Platform at the 2017 Event Technology Awards. To learn how Engage can make your business more profitable, visit d2isystems.com/engage. And at that point, we come to the end of today's episode. It's late afternoon for me here in the UK. It's still early in the morning there, I've no doubt, for Val. So he's got a full, glorious New York day ahead of him to go and continue the work that they're doing. Val, thanks again for joining the podcast today.
Thank you, James. It was a pleasure.
And we'll see all of our podcast followers and listeners on the next episode of the Event Industry News podcast. Thanks very much, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.